morning, St. Peter's. I'm a little shocked that Mother Page allows me access to a microphone, knowing that I'm an amateur genealogist and I have a captive audience. That doesn't happen to me very often. It's very exciting. I'm just controlling myself to not share my entire 500 years of family history, but I have other things to talk about today. I have a picture from my first day in kindergarten. I was wearing my school uniform, gray slacks, black loafers, a white button-down shirt, and a blue sweater. And I was turned sideways, heading up the stairs, looking back at my mother with a big smile on my face, waving. There were several steps leading up to the street, and I think my mom had me stop at most of them to wave back at her so she could capture the moment. Along with my first day of school, it was also my first day of chapel. The first day of 8 years of daily chapel to start my day. I have very fond memories of chapel at All Saints Episcopal Day School, singing hymns with Father Peter Farmer, and being mesmerized by stories from the Bible like Joseph and his really mean brothers, Daniel and his lion pals, and Lot's wife, who was just not good at following directions. Or at least that's something like how I thought of those stories growing up. The highlight of my chapel experience, though, was with Father Farmer. It was an Ash Wednesday service, and I was the last to receive the cross on my forehead. And Father Farmer turned and handed me the ashes and signaled me to make a cross on his forehead. I felt so honored. It was like going to a baseball game and Tony Gwynn calling you out of the stands to play catch with him. I also attended church on Sundays at St. James Episcopal Church down the hill from my house. Church and school fit really nicely together for me for several years, really, until my early teen years when I started to have questions. I'm not sure about you, but for me, in spite of my immersion in the Episcopal world, there was no place to go to express doubt or confusion, or to ask questions without fear that one would be exposing oneself as unworthy, or so I thought as a young person. Entering my 8th grade year, I changed schools. And I remember a conversation with my mom in the car from around this time. She raised me alone for the most part, and so the tough conversations fell to her. I'd started at a high school that also had an 8th grade, and at least for the first year was all boys. No chapel, lots of testosterone and boy energy. It was quite a transition. Mom was driving me to school one morning before she would turn and head to work at the doctor's office where she was office manager. She asked me about baseball and confirmation classes. Sending me to this new school was a sacrifice for her, one that she was very happy to make because she believed strongly in the transformative power of education. But it meant money and time that she was already short of. So she presented me with some choices. She asked me if I wanted to play in my second year of Pony League baseball, that's the next stop after Little League, and told me that she wasn't sure how we would manage the rides to practice after school, but she would try to figure it out. And as much as I loved baseball, I let that one go. It wasn't an altruistic show of appreciation for my mom. I wish I could say that were true. I'd gone through a rough first year in Pony League and had soured on the team that I would have to go back to again if I stayed. It was still hard, though, because I loved and still love baseball so much. What was harder, but for different reasons, was to say no to confirmation classes. I knew it would disappoint my mom, but I was afraid of being exposed as a bad Christian if I had regular classes with Father Cunningham at St. James. I think it would have been different with Father Farmer because he was so kind and gentle. Father Cunningham intimidated me. I felt like he could see my doubts as they swirled in my brain. And frankly, I was terrified of confirmation classes with him enough to get me past the guilt of disappointing my mother. So I said no. That was a big step. Shortly after I left All Saints School and Daily Chapel and the influence of Father Farmer, I also left St. James in my years as an acolyte. I'd reached an age where a driving force in life became avoiding shame, and all the questions, doubts, and fears about my faith left me with an abundance of shame that I just couldn't face. I didn't stop having questions or wondering about God and heaven and sin and my role in the world, but the church was no longer part of my life. Then I got married much later. I was 52 when I got married, actually. And I married that woman sitting back there who's way out of my league. I shared in the last service one of my buddies who knew Cheska when we were in college. When I called him and said, "Hey, I just got engaged to Cheska." He's like, "Dude, you are punching way above your weight." And yeah, absolutely. He's 100% right. I can't say that I hadn't thought of church since my teen years when I left St. James. I've always felt the presence of God when I walked into any church. I feel it in my body when I walk into church. My wife and I were married by a good friend in a small, secular backyard ceremony, surrounded by Cheska's family and my friends who are my family. And now I was a husband and also a stepfather to two really smart, interesting college-aged women. Cheska and I would walk from our home in Boulder to shops and restaurants, past several churches to get to downtown. The older of my two stepdaughters was moving towards marriage with a fellow grad student, and they were attending Catholic services, even though Julia hadn't been raised in any particular faith. Cheska and I started to talk about what we could do to support their faith journey as they married and started a family. We talked about my past experiences in the church and about maybe meeting with a priest to ask some questions, maybe even a Bible study. But nothing concrete ever came of those talks while we still lived in Boulder. Then 3 years ago, in September, Cheska and I moved back here to be closer to family and close friends. I found myself watching a lot of YouTube videos by Bible scholars, channels such as Religion for Breakfast and Misquoting Jesus, Bart Ehrman's podcast. Clearly, something was working its way up from the deep trying to speak to me. It wasn't until Cheska started visiting various churches with the wives of some of my friends that I knew that something was resolving inside of me. One Sunday, she came back from her first visit to a small church in Del Mar, and her energy was different. Several things about the service had struck her, and she was more animated in our discussion of her visit. She spoke about Mother Page and what she had to say. She spoke about how this church really seemed like a community that did something positive in the world. It happened to be the Sunday where a representative from Beacon spoke. Cheska also talked about how the building was lovely, but it was obvious that they weren't sinking all their money into turning it into a showroom, more like a vacation Bible camp feel, but for adults, with redwood buildings and a big crack in one of the walls where we sit. I asked if she was interested in going back, and I asked if I could go with her. And that request took both of us by surprise, because I hadn't mentioned that I was at all interested in going to church with her. So the next Sunday, I was at church in a service that wasn't a wedding or a funeral for the first time in decades. Truthfully, I wasn't sure what to expect or how I would feel. I just felt called to go to church with my wife. When I walked onto the church grounds, I was nervous, but also excited to see this lovely, warm building that actually reminds me of St. James, the church I attended as a kid. The service started, and it wasn't long before I found myself quietly crying in the pew. And then Mother Page said something that I still think about often. It wasn't something she'd written, but looking at her face as she spoke the words inviting us to keep the feast, I could tell how important those words were to her. Before I share her words, let me assume that most people here know the movie or the book, The Princess Bride? Okay. If you're true fans, then you know that what Wesley meant when he responded to even Buttercup's most outrageous request with the simple phrase, "as you wish," that he was saying, "I love you." When the grandpa, played by Peter Falk, leaves his grandson's room and his grandson says, "Maybe you could come back tomorrow and read more of the book, if you want." And Peter Falk's character smiles and replies, "As you wish." He was quietly telling his grandson how much he loved him. In the same way, when Mother Page says, and she says it every Sunday, "This is the table not of the church, but of Jesus Christ. It is made ready for those who love him and want to love him more. So come, you who have much faith and you who have little. You who have been here often and you who have not been here for a long time or even before or ever before. You who have tried to follow and you who have failed. Come, not because the church invites you. It is Christ, and he invites you to meet him here." It's funny, I struggle to read that every time, and every time Mother Page says it, I choke up because it's such a powerful invitation. When she says that, she's saying, "As you wish," to all of us. And she isn't just speaking for herself, if you catch my drift. The community of St. Peter's is a place of love. It's a place where our Sunday service ends with the call, "This service has ended, and now ours begins." It is a call every week to be the hands and feet of Christ, his body here on earth. A place where we can come for a myriad of reasons, but where we are reminded that Christ tells us to love God and to love God's people. And the way to love them isn't to think about them in glowing terms, although that's lovely also. It's to be of service to them. Look, I'm no Fran Friesen or Cinda Lucas or Jillian Crooks or any of the other amazing humans who sit around you on Sunday and then just hustle around the St. Peter's universe being of service. Someday I hope to reach a level even close to one of those people. And you don't have to start out being superhuman here, I'm not saying that, but find something that drives you or find some place where you can fill a hole until you find what drives you. This lovely church has its hands in so many service pies, it's quite remarkable to me. As a young person, I thought being a good Christian was about going to church, believing all the things, and being nice to everyone. I wasn't wrong about those things, but really, this is a place where you don't have to come in knowing, understanding, or believing everything you hear. It's an act of faith to come here and listen with an open mind and an open heart to try to know God more, to try to be a little more like Christ showed you how to be. That was what opened the door for me to begin my faith journey anew, or my return to faith, or my faith refresh, or whatever it was. But to begin here, knowing that I could have doubts and questions, and that it was not only tolerated, but encouraged for you to get in there and dig around and ask questions without fear. My wife and I went through confirmation class together, and I think Mother Page was tempted to hide from me and my constant questions about the Trinity. But she never did. It became a running joke for us. She said, 3 minutes, should we cover the Trinity now? But it was an amazing experience. Soon after we shared that sacramental rite with you here, Mother Page approached me to join a new class of EFM, which I highly recommend. If you ever have any questions about it, please come punch me in the arm or something in the courtyard and ask me about it. Our mentors, Anne and Pete, are really incredible. But please allow me to talk about my wife for a moment. I'm very proud of her. That's my wife, Cheska, sitting back there with a scarf. Years before I even began courting her, she'd spent a lot of energy looking for ways to be of service. She started a fund in Austin where she'd raised her girls. And the fund was created to provide basically emergency grants to help young people in the foster care system who are working with court-appointed special advocates, CASAs, if you've heard of that. It often happened that the young people needed something urgently, like a bed, so they could be placed with a family member instead of strangers. But the family couldn't have otherwise afforded to take them at the time and also purchase a bed for them. The fund's been working really well for 15 years now and has even grown. She's also worked with UNICEF to make sure that the middle of the country had groups in place to drive fundraising in those areas. Those are just a few of the philanthropic efforts my wife has supported over the years. So she's educated me about what it takes to keep service programs running. Even so, I was surprised that she so quickly agreed that we needed to get in our pledge the first year we joined St. Peter's. As a vestry member, I'm learning more about what it takes to keep all of the ministries running here. Even with the enthusiastic volunteers, it takes money to feed people. It takes money to keep orphanages open. I know you don't come to church to hear about money, but being the hands and feet of Christ means we have to operate in this world. And so it helps St. Peter's ministries operate in this world and do his work. Please consider getting your pledge in as soon as possible so that St. Peter's can realistically plan their programming out into the future. And if I may, I'd like to close with a brief meditation by Stephen Charleston, a retired Episcopalian bishop, from his book Spirit Circle. This is a book that I found through EFM, where we read another of his books in the interlude. It's called Praying for Me. Somewhere on this crowded planet, in a place I've never been before and will never visit in my lifetime, someone I do not know and will never meet has just said a prayer in a language I do not understand, as an expression of faith in a religion I do not accept. And yet the prayer was for me. Please bless all those who are in need, the stranger prayed, and that includes me. The wonder of faith is not that we all agree, but that we all care, even when we are strangers. So I return the prayer. Please bless all who are in need. All, please, not some, for they are praying for me as I pray for them. Amen. Thank you.